On VE Day, the crowds cheered Churchill with the deepest affection and gratitude. He'd become something as permanent as any king or queen. The voters wanted things for which Churchill had no program, and in June they elected Attlee's government. This certainly left Churchill free to write history and to visit it, too. This was Hitler's final shelter in Berlin. Gandhi and Nehru were released from prison. As lawyers, they knew why they'd been there, but as saints, they were puzzled. West of Suez, few lawyers decide to become saints. It is too confusing. Al Smith had died in '44 and was already becoming a legend, though not quite a saint. Mao and Chiang toasted each other with their fingers crossed. It was a Melba toast, thin and dry. The mantle of FDR descended on Harry Truman, who seemed untroubled by it. Roosevelt had been warned that a fourth term might be the death of him, and so it proved soon after his fourth inauguration. He had beaten Tom Dewey fairly narrowly. So it was President Truman who had to go to Potsdam and talk business with the Russians. Truman told Stalin a little about the bomb, and Stalin showed a formal interest. Stalin was more interested, though, in the invention of an Iron Curtain, and this he got. 3 years after the war, Eisenhower became president of Columbia University, and 4 years after that, he became president of his country. The United Nations had been set up in San Francisco in June, but the first meeting was held in London. Here King George VI chats with Attlee, Ernest Bevin, and James Burns. Anthony Eden was still considered a rising star, and one of some magnitude, too. The king's cheerfulness did not reflect his health and his cares. Olivier brought real kings and real Shakespeare back to the screen. Hollywood's post-war cry was Gable's back and Garson's got him. But old soldiers preferred Grable to Garson plus Gable. Hollywood wanted Betty Hutton to play something quieter than her usual noisy self, so they got her to try playing the role of Texas Guinan, which doesn't seem any too quiet. Even Jimmy Durante, seen here with his radio stooge Gary Moore, was quieter than Betty Hutton. And Goodman came back to jazz after a slip disc and an excursion into the classics. And speaking of clarinets, old Sidney Bechet was still going strong all through the 40s and into the 50s, too. And one of the biggest vocal hits of 1945 was Is You Is or Is You Ain't My Baby.
Is you is or is you ain't my baby? When you're acting lately makes me doubt. Now you is still my baby, baby. Or is my flame in your heart done gone out? Now a woman is a creature who has always been strange. Just when you're sure of one, you find she's gonna play the change. Now is you is or is you ain't my baby? Maybe baby found somebody new. Or is my baby still my baby true?
How about that? Real fine tune.
The hottest thing on the human race tracks was the mile runner Gunder Haig from Sweden. In 1942, he was running the mile in just over 4 minutes and 6 seconds, beating Wooderson's old record. By 1945, he could do it in 4 minutes, 1 2/5 seconds. He was not quite as effortless as old Nurmi had been 20 years before, but he was very, very smooth. His countryman, Arne Anderson, could also run a mile in under 4:02. Haig ran all distances from 1,500 to 5,000 meters. He held world records for 7 distances at once, which is a pretty good record in itself. In the 5,000 meters, he beat the old record by about 20 seconds. Salvador Dali was now known to all laymen by the power of self-advertisement. The great Augustus John lived on, a more gifted and original creature than Gully Jimson ever was. Joyce Carey published The Horse's Mouth in '44, but it wasn't famous till after the war. The most appalling work of man-made art was this fantastic cloudscape. Overhead rushes life in a race, as the clouds chase. These tremendous thunderheads with their cargo have hung over us ever since 1945, so this old scrap of film does not show anything very different from what we have now. But 1945 was the first year in which the cloud appeared, and many people who were not children at the time will remember the overnight change in many things. An archbishop told us we had all invented the bomb, which was a little hard to believe when we'd never heard of it before. Well, ever since that new nightmare, we've waited for a new kind of sunrise. Meantime, the ads reminded us that now peace was here, we could get nail files again. More than one firm told us that the finest welcome home would be a new radio. Your son would be glad to see you, but only a new radio could make him feel that the whole war had been worthwhile. After the Jeeps got through the Siegfried line, you could buy civilian Jeeps. Hot rods were in the news again, too, because unrationed gasoline was back. Sealed beam headlights were new, though the cars themselves were echoes of 42. Aircraft firms were fooling around with strange helicopters. Here are some side-by-side rotors stuck out on wings. In Chattanooga, grade 2 kids attended ground school flying lessons. A good many bees quit flying because of the new DDT, which killed bees even quicker than it killed mosquitoes. To keep up with all this science, one of the big radio networks explained it was really a university of the air. Rah, 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 cum laude. There was strike violence everywhere. This is outside Warner Brothers. The craze for blowing bubbles obsessed the continent for a few weeks. And fashion decreed that your silhouette must bubble out a good deal, too, all curves and roundness. Billy Daché said we must wear hoods, and most women obeyed. John Robert Powers of Powers Models was a national figure. Who started that? Well, maybe he did. Janet Blair said the big news of 45 was the return of nylons. She said it was a glamour year for legs. In Canada, where this film was shot, there really hadn't been any nylons until 1945, so the excitement was really frantic. And just as a soldier was entitled to dream about a radio if he chose to, a girl was entitled to dream about nylons if she chose to. Dreams are a matter of local option. And this was a 1945 fashion show, also in Canada. Any kind of civilian clothes would look pretty good to a girl who had been in uniform for anything up to 6 years. We don't know if these clothes are absolutely typical of 1945. To some people, they may vividly recall that year, and to others, they may be a blank. It isn't every fashion show that gives you an accurate summary of a whole year's major trends, but whether these clothes were really characteristic or not, the film was shot in 45, all right. British war brides were picketing the U.S. Embassy in London, demanding transportation. The film The Lost Weekend created a stir as a 1945 version of The Drunkard. Elia Kazan made a film of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Elizabeth Taylor was a big star at 13 and kind to animals. Margaret O'Brien was a pretty big star at merely 8. And on Broadway, Billion Dollar Baby made fun of what it could remember of the Charleston era 20 years before. The great Jerome Kern died in 45. Now, there's a man who wouldn't remember the 20s all wrong. He and the 20s were good to each other. And he wouldn't have scowled at 1945 as the books do now for singing light rubbish in the fallout. He knew that people can think of grave things and gay ones at the same time. One day they may lose that gift, but they hadn't done so by 1945, and we can prove it. Listen.
Kiss me once, kiss me twice, kiss me once again. It's been a long, long time. I haven't felt like this, my dear, since can't remember when. It's been a long, long time. You'll never know how many times I dreamed about you, or just how empty they all seemed without you. Kiss me once, kiss me twice, kiss me once again. It's been a long, long time.
You won't be satisfied until you break my heart. You're never satisfied until the teardrops go. I tried to shower you with love and kisses, but all I ever get from you is nagging and bragging. My poor heart is sagging the way you toss my heart around. It's a crying shame. I bet you wouldn't like it if I did the same. You're only happy tearing all my dreams apart. You won't be satisfied until you break my heart. When Madame Pompadour was on the ballroom floor, said all the gentlemen obviously, the madam has the cutest personality. And think of all the books about Du Barry's looks. What was it made her the hit of Paris? The madam has the cutest personality. And what did Romeo see in Juliet and Pierrot in Pierrette and Jupiter in Juno? You know. And when Salome danced and had the boys entranced, no doubt it must have been easy to see that she knew how to use her personality. Personality.
How many hearts have you broken with those great, big, beautiful eyes? Great, big, beautiful eyes that tell such wonderful lies. How many times have you kissed somebody like you kissed me just then? I don't believe that you mean it, but baby, tell me again. How many hearts have you stranded on the rocky road to romance? Wiggy, I'll take a chance. I need some loving. I can't do without you, even though I'm wise. How many hearts have you broken with those great, big, beautiful eyes?
I'm a little on the lonely, a little on the lonely side. I keep thinking of you only and wishing you were by my side. You know, my dear, when you're not here, there's no one to romance with. So if I'm seen with someone else, it's just someone to dance with. Every letter that you write me, I read a dozen times more. Any wonder that I love you more and more? Oh, how I miss your tender kiss and long to hold you tight. I'm a little on the lonely side tonight.
Do you hear that whistle down the line? I figure that it's engine number 49. It's the only one that'll sound that way on the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. CBO smoke rising round the bend. I reckon that you know you're gonna meet a friend. Those around these parts get the time of day on the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. Here she comes, ooh, and again you better get the ring. Ooh, she got a list that gets pretty big, and they all want lips to brown hotel. Cause I'm the men to travel in for quite a spell, all the way from Philadelphia on the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe.
Next week, we'll be going back to the year 1931, the year when everybody was saying life is just a bowl of cherries, and were probably wearing beach pajamas when they said it. Try to be with us when we recall some of those days.